Yuji Itadori has just shocked the world, comboing the King of Curses in amazing fashion. This led to Yuji Itadori being at the forefront of everyone's minds, but let's not forget why our main character is fighting so hard in the first place. He not only wants to kill Sukuna, but retrieve the body of his friend, Megumi Fushiguro. And in today's video, let's take Yuji and make him save Megumi from his past misfortunes. What's up guys, RestlessGambly here, and in today's video, I decided to work on sleepless nights to create this ginormous video. I'll assume this will be my longest video yet, but I know it will all be worth it. Today, I decided to put Yuji into the Megumi gauntlet and find out what would happen if we switch Yuji and Megumi's fights. I'll be making a Megumi version when he comes back in the manga, so don't sleep. Anyways, I was walking up the stairs yesterday and suddenly I went backwards. Then I saw something at the top of the stairs. 19% of you guys are subscribed. Oh my god! If you enjoy GGK videos like these, go ahead and subscribe. You get more videos and we'll both be happy. To make this gauntlet make sense, the versions of Yuji I'll be using will be the Yuji that exists at the same time as Megumi during that fight. So to make it more clear, I'm not putting current Yuji up against the random ass cursed spirit they fought in the first chapter. That would be boring. We'll keep score of how much wins Yuji gets, and for each scenario, especially when Yuji and Megumi are present at the same time, I'll likely just switch their perspectives. It would be cool to find out how exactly the story changes if Yuji takes Megumi's place in certain situations, but that would make the video too long altogether. With that said, we'll start off with the first ever fight in the entire series, Megumi versus a couple of random cursed spirits. Now, Yuji clearly has an advantage over Megumi in physical capabilities. We were told that Yuji was blessed with a physicality superior to Maki, a half-awakened heavily restriction user. This was what allowed Yuji to kick around different curses and even somehow jump to the 4th floor from the ground up. That's cool and all, and Megumi notices this, but then he mentions the one flaw. Yuji has no cursed energy. So if we replace Megumi right here with Yuji, of course he'd be able to stun the cursed spirits in his way, run past them and get his friends from this cursed spirit, but he wouldn't have the means to actually finish them off. Let's say Megumi jumps in just like Yuji here, and then the Big Daddy curse comes down from the ceiling. In the original story, Yuji didn't actually sense this cursed spirit, and he even had Sukuna's finger in his hand, so he'd be trapped just like Megumi was. The way this cursed spirit was dealt with the first time was by Sukuna. This only happened because Yuji found out he needs cursed energy to exorcise the cursed spirit. Then after, Megumi told him eating Sukuna's finger would give him cursed energy. In this timeline, however, Megumi would notice how many cursed spirits are pulling up because Yuji didn't actually exorcise them, so I don't think it's far-fetched to assume that Yuji would be told about the conditions to kill curses. In that case, Yuji would eat Sukuna's finger and Sukuna would end up deleting the curse altogether. I'll give Yuji a half win because without Sukuna, technically he has no means to exercise the curse, but it's because he eats Sukuna that he ends up defeating the cursed spirit in the first place. The next fight we have is actually against Sukuna. We'll keep Sukuna in Yuji's body, so Yuji's basically fighting his doppelganger or something, but here's the thing. When Sukuna fought Megumi, of course he was trying to have fun. I can't really claim that Sukuna was trying to test Megumi out because it was during their fight when he realized how incredible his curse technique actually was. So what I can say again is that Sukuna was toying with Megumi and trying to have some fun. It's basically what he's doing right now in the manga. The question is, would Sukuna go ahead and do the same thing against Yuji? Everything Yuji knows, Sukuna knows, so there isn't anything to test out. Yuji has no special tricks and is literally overall boring. It's also kind of funny that we're talking about this fight right now because we literally saw what a bloodlusted Sukuna did to Yuji. He literally just sliced his head off. That's an L for Yuji. In chapter 16, before the Goodwill arc, Megumi and Nobara meet Mai and Todo. Now, upon rereading the scene, I thought Yuji wouldn't even fight Todo because if Todo asked what his type was, he'd just say tall girls with big butts. But then I forgot there was another factor here. Nobara. In chapter 42, Nobara asks Yuji what he thinks about Maki and he starts sweating. Because of Nobara's personality, Yuji starts stuttering and says that she's a very nice lady. Do you think if Todo asked what Yuji's type was that he would just blurt out some BS in front of Nobara of all people? especially when Nobara literally said Megumi would have died if he said big boobs or something. So clearly in this timeline, with Nobara staring down Yuji's neck, he'd say exactly what he said about Maki, that he likes nice women. And so Todo would get triggered because that's insanely boring. And so they enter combat. When Yuji fought Todo in the original story, Todo verbatim states that Yuji is just stronger than him. I think this refers to pure physicality because his statement right after is about his cursed energy, and the statement itself talks about how small Yuji is compared to him. But remember that the Yuji we're using right now is a Yuji a day after he witnessed domain expansion for the first time. This Yuji literally only just started flowing cursed energy, let alone reinforcing his body with it. So he'd be fighting Todo with his base stats that we already set or above him, but Todo can reinforce his body with cursed energy, so he'd eclipse Yuji in every aspect. In regular hand-to-hand, Todo would just win, but if Todo even thinks about using his curse technique, Yuji is finished. Put another L on the board. When the Goodwill event starts, Yuji goes to fight Todo in the original story, but as he fights him and accidentally creates a bond with him, a majority of the Kyoto school students appear to jump Yuji, and it's almost too apparent that everyone there had one mission in mind: kill Yuji Itadori. Todo of course saves him, and so everyone there goes to have their own battles, with Noritoshi Kamo fighting our main man, Megumi Fushiguro. Now, if we replace Megumi with Yuji here, Kamo would fight 100 times harder because he was given the mission to kill Yuji, as well as his own choice because he's the heir of the throne to the Kamo clan. While Kamo and Megumi were fighting, Yuji was actually getting a lesson from Todo, and by the time we actually get to see them box, Yuji already threw away Divergent Fist and learned how to properly call himself in Cursed Energy. Now that we established that Kamo would fight as hard as possible against Yuji, and that the version of Yuji we'll be using will be the one right before the Hanami fight, let's get into how this fight would have probably gone. In chapter 43, we see Kamo shoot arrows at Megumi in ways that shouldn't be possible, but he makes it possible with his cursed technique, blood manipulation. Going into this battle, Megumi had intel on his cursed technique because he knew him from before, but Yuji knows literally nothing about anyone there, so he'd be in the dark about how the arrows are somehow aiming from different directions. However, I don't doubt that Yuji would be able to get through this and try to close the distance. This is funny because in the original story, that's literally exactly what Kamo does against Megumi. However, there's something you need to keep in mind. So far, two people have done the same things and realized the same thing. Both Sukuna and Kamo realized that Megumi isn't actually a Shikigami merchant because he'd actually start boxing in hand-to-hand combat if he wants. In this timeline, seeing as Yuji is quite literally a punch-kick merchant, I don't think it's crazy to assume that Kamo wouldn't deliberately try to get into close combat unless Yuji forces him to. It's actually made known to us that things like Piercing Blood and his other projectile attacks were way stronger than the bullshit he was using against Megumi. So while he shoots these arrows, Kamo will be charging up a Piercing Blood. Now, in the original story, upon Yuji facing a Piercing Blood for the first time, he 1. Watches Choso just charge it up in his face, and 2. Reacts fast enough to block it, but he resorts to redirecting it because he was going to go through his guard. In this scenario, he'd be mostly off guard and unaware that Kamo is even charging this up, and so it would definitely hit him. On top of that, there's something else you need to understand. From the Goodwill arc to Shibuya, Yuji had a power up, and that was the use of Black Flash. Gojo even comments on Yuji's new strength. This Yuji is not the same as this Yuji. Let's say Yuji senses Kamo charging the Piercing Blood up for argument's sake, and he blocks it just like he did with Choso. I can't really prove that every Piercing Blood is the same power because it's more likely than not that Choso's is more powerful than Kamo's. So with that being said, we'll say that the impact of Kamo's Piercing Blood would be the same as when Yuji got hit with Choso's, given that Shibuya Yuji is just stronger than his Goodwill counterpart. This means his left arm would be out of play for a little bit because of the Piercing Blood's impact on his guard. That really doesn't matter, however, because just like Choso, Kamo would be keeping his distance from Yuji. Kamo would also be using Flowing Red Scale Stack if Yuji tries to run up on him. If that happens, of course, I don't think Kamo can keep up at all. But the more likely scenario is that Yuji can't really pressure Kamo too much because he'd be constantly sending Piercing Bloods. While the power of piercing bloods can't really be argued to be equal, the speed however is exactly the same. When we see Choso use it, it's compared directly to Kamo, so these piercing bloods would be even faster against this Yuji because he's a slower counterpart. For this reason, the second piercing blood Kamo sends would hit Yuji again, even if he tries to do the jumping play, because his chances are under 50% of dodging it when Kamo releases it. If another piercing blood hits Yuji, he's dying. But if Yuji ever manages to close the distance, which again is very unlikely, then I think Yuji would take the fight. But we're being real cutthroat here, so give that man another L. In the original story, while Megumi and Kamo were fighting it out, all of a sudden a large figure appears next to them and they see Inumaki running away. It's Hanami, a disaster cursed spirit. Now you can say two fights happen here, but we'll combine them into one. If Yuji teams up with Kamo and Inumaki, we'd see the same thing we saw with Yuji going against Hanami in the original story. He'd try to close the distance and he'd likely be able to damage Hanami with his base punches. That's kind of debatable if that's the case, since it's stated he can damage Hanami after his Black Flash, but let's give Yuji the benefit of the doubt. With Inumaki holding Hanami in place, Yuji damaging him, and Kamo damaging him, I definitely see the fight going better than it did in the original. However, of course, no one has the means to actually defeat her, so Maki entered the fray, making up the second half of the fight. I think Inumaki's trash ass would still drop out because his throat gave up, and Kamo would take him away, so it's Maki and Yuji versus Hanami. In this timeline, Maki actually doesn't have the means to get Playful Cloud because, well, Yuji doesn't have the 10 Shadows technique. And so Maki would literally be weaponless alongside Yuji as well. This fight would essentially be Yuji and a weaker Yuji fighting Hanami. And I can't really gauge if Maki's physical attacks would be able to damage Hanami as well, and to be honest, I highly doubt that's even plausible. For that reason, while the first fight was better than the original, this fight would go way worse. They would try to inbox Hanami with only one of them being able to actually damage her. Yuji knows of Black Flash by this time, but he's never told to stop letting his emotions get the better of him. And then we get the factor that we never considered, the cursed buds. In the original story, Yuji was saved from the buzz by Todo, and Todo before his delusion was going to block with cursed energy. That's clearly the common consensus, and so Yuji would do the same, but Yuji doesn't have schizophrenia, so he wouldn't have a Yuji wouldn't have a delusional inner dialogue to save him, and so he would just get hit with the bud and he'd run out of cursed energy. Maki would have to hold her own against Hanami, which would go way worse than the original because she doesn't have a weapon, and so I think it's safe to say that that's another UGL.
Damn!
Megumi goes MIA for the rest of this arc, and so the next fight we have is during the Origin of Obedience arc. He fights these fodder ass mole curses, and then what awaits him was 100 times stronger. Yuji would easily whack all these moles, but when the special grade finger bearer comes in, that's when everything gets more complicated. We're told that this finger bearer is much stronger than the one that we saw at the beginning of the story, and we see this in play. Megumi keeps getting blitzed by the finger bearer and only dodges an attack when his divine dogs carry him away. I don't think Yuji will suffer the same fate however, because we got literal confirmation that Megumi is just weaker than Yuji. I don't think it's far-fetched to say that Yuji and the finger bearer will be at least in the same tier of speed. This is good because in this fight, we actually got a comparison between this finger bearer and Hanami herself. Megumi says that the divine dog damaged Hanami, so that cursed spirit while off guard could easily get one shot. The reason the cursed spirit was off guard in the first place was because he thought he killed Megumi, but that wouldn't be replicated by Yuji. But we do know that this version of Yuji does get a Black Flash during the battle, and so if Yuji uses that on the finger bearer, it's clips. Not only does he enter the zone, but the attack itself might as well just one-shot him. Going forward, Yuji would dominate the fight, so put a W on the board for my guy. After this mini arc, everything starts to get crazier because we officially enter the Shibuya arc. For the first segment of Shibuya, Yuji is actually with Megumi, and so they jump this poor old man. As soon as the curtain falls and Ino is found beat up, they decide to split up, Megumi taking Ino away and Yuji going into the station. From there, Yuji fights Choso, and right after we get to see Dagon versus Maki, Naobito, Nanami, and eventually Megumi. Now here's the thing. Megumi arrives after Dagon already releases domain expansion, and so for some reason, Megumi resorts to releasing his own domain expansion. But we all know what Yuji does when he sees a domain expansion. He breaks it from the outside. When Yuta deconstructs his domain, he creates a single hole and it shatters everything else. I don't think it's insane to assume Yuji punching a hole through the domain would shatter Dagon's domain altogether. This would lead to now Beto and Nanami being less injured than they were in the original story, but Maki never gets Playful Cloud. Dagon is officially burnt out from his curse technique, and so he has to fight all 4 combatants without it. However, I don't think all 4 of these people have the means to actually defeat Dagon, because now Beto is completely cooked and Nanami was close to being cooked, so they don't have the means to actually exercise this powerhouse. That is, until the one who left it all behind joins the fight. I need you to remember one thing. Toji doesn't have curse energy, and just his attacks wouldn't kill Dagon. That's why in the original story, he grabs Playful Cloud, because it's a cursed tool. In this timeline, there is no Playful Cloud for Toji to grab because Megumi isn't there, so the next best thing is Nanami's weapon. I don't know if it was ever stated that Nanami's weapon was a cursed tool, but what we do know is that with constant curse energy reinforcement, it eventually becomes one. Miwa's regular sword became sort of a cursed tool because she kept using curse energy with it. Nanami has been in the field longer than Miwa, so I think it's safe to assume at the very least that the weapon was turned into a cursed tool. With that said, Toji would immediately grab that out of Nanami's hands and go to work. I don't think it would be as fast as the original because the weapon itself is literally a blunt blade, but I think it should be enough to get the job done with Toji's speed and stats. Let's make that a W for Yuji. In the original story, as soon as Toji kills Dagon, he immediately turns around and takes Megumi outside of the area to fight him. With now Beto being still heavily weakened in this timeline, I think the same exact thing would occur. There's going to be a huge extra factor that I'll go into in a second, but right now let's focus on the fight at hand. The entire time Megumi fought Toji, he was at a clear disadvantage, with his Shikigami being his only saving grace. It was only because of rapid escape that Megumi could even come up with a plan to hit Toji. Yuji not only does not have that, but also doesn't have the luxury to think of a good plan against Toji. Toji has Nanami's weapon, he's also faster, stronger, and more durable. Nothing, and I mean nothing, that Yuji does here does anything to Toji. He'd get blitzed multiple times, take heavy damage, and fail to even hit him. But then the extra factor comes in. Jogo. Jogo's mission was to find Yuji and turn him into Sukuna. Funnily enough, I just noticed that all 3 people who wanted to find Yuji actually ended up finding Yuji. Anyways, we've got a little bit of creative freedom here. Under normal circumstances, I think the most plausible idea is that Toji would have decimated Yuji before Jogo pulls up, but since this is a Yuji video, let's say that while Toji fights Yuji, Jogo arrived. Remember, again, Jogo's mission is to turn Yuji into Sukuna, so I don't actually think he'd help Toji in fighting Yuji. Rather, I think he wants to deal with any obstacles in the way. So now, it's Yuji and Jogo versus Toji. Jogo versus Toji is argued about on its own by the community, and I'd understand if Toji wasn't just completely superior to him. Toji and Maki are equals, and a suppressed Maki was able to box comparably with 15-finger Sukuna. There's a lot of arguments about whether or not this Sukuna was completely weakened because of Megumi, but the nuance of this scene is that his curse technique is weakened, not his physicals. 15-finger Sukuna is the same guy who Jogo couldn't even hit once. So if they were to fight head to head, Toji would just win. He has better speed stats and his durability eclipses Jogo's. Yuji is kind of a non-factor here because again, Toji is just a completely superior version of him, and Jogo would also beat the bricks out of Yuji. Toji only has Nanami's weapon here, so just like Dagon, it would take a little longer than usual to exercise him, but Jogo's durability is even worse than Dagon's, so he's out of here. Then after, Yuji would just lose consequently as well. What a terrible timeline, because Toji is on the loose. Put another L on the board. After Megumi fought Toji, he gets caught off guard by Haruta and then summons Mahoraga to compensate for Sukuna's looming threat. I don't think it's really necessary to switch Yuji here, so with that said, Megumi's Shibuya career is over and now we enter the arcs afterwards. In chapter 146, Maki assigns Megumi and Yuji to go retrieve Hikari so that he can help in suppressing the culling games. When they arrive, Yuji enters the front fields, directly becoming part of Hikari's fight club in order to go in and talk to him. Megumi, however, ironically moves in the shadows, trying to find a way to get to Hikari as well. If we swap their places, what we need to focus on is the altercation Megumi enters right after. Kirara sees Megumi and realizes that they're all from Jujutsu Tech, so she calls Hikari to let him know that there's an emergency, and then they start fighting. Kirara's curse technique is derived from the Southern Cross constellation. There are 5 stars in play here: Imai, Acrux, Mimosa, Ginan, and Gacrux. I hope I'm not pronouncing those wrong, but whatever, right? Anyways, during her fight with Megumi, Kirara assigned each star to multiple things. Imai was set to Panda, Acrux was set to Megumi, Mimosa was set to a random ass place on the parking lot, Ginan was set to herself, and Gacrux was set to the door to Hikari's room. The biggest problem during this fight was the fact that Megumi cannot interact with the door to Hikari or Kirara. Every time he tried, he or his Shikigami was being pushed away. To get through it, a star has to interact with the next star physically, and then that same star can interact with other stars. For example, Megumi was the Acrux star, the second star in the sequence, and he couldn't interact with Kirara until he found the Mimosa star, the third star. Eventually, Megumi found it and touched it, so from then, Megumi would have been able to interact with Kirara, and he defeats her with Divine Dog. Upon the second read, Kirara's curse technique isn't that complex. The thing is, you need prior knowledge of the star constellation to even think about guessing what this curse technique is. You know who wouldn't have this knowledge? Yuji Itadori. If we replace Megumi with Yuji here, he noticed that Kirara is going to call someone, so he tried to bring the fight to her. Kirara will get cooked in hand-to-hand combat clearly, but one touch is all it takes for the fight to become very complex. Kirara literally blocked Divine Dog and it got marked, so one block of Yuji's attack is literally enough. From there, Yuji would be part of the constellation just like Megumi was. Yuji would be confused as to what the hell is going on because he just wouldn't be able to get close to Kirara, just like Gojo's technique. Kirara, however, would just stand there because she wants to make sure that they don't find out what her curse technique is. This would literally become a sort of stalemate. While this happens, Megumi would be in the room trying to convince Hikari, something he'd do way easier than Yuji, so Yuji would be saved from their deadlock. That was a draw, so we won't add anything to Yuji's score. After convincing Hikari to help them, Yuji, Megumi, the Goat, and Panda all enter the culling games at the same time. All of a sudden, they're all split between colonies. Megumi in this timeline would end up where the helicopter man was, and Yuji would end up in front of Remy. I don't really know if Remy would be treated the same way Megumi treated her, but of course, she would convince him that he be led to Higuruma directly by her. However, suddenly, he's face to face with a guy butt naked with his clothes being receipts. Nice going, Yuji. To be honest, this little segment would be a hassle to go over in Yuji's character, so I'll say this. Yuji would no-diff this guy and throw him off the building just like Megumi did. Then he'd do exactly the same things as Megumi does right after, but the first major change is that Yuji would not kill this random guy. Megumi already said this, he's not like Yuji, he'll kill if he needs to, and I don't think Yuji has the heart to do that. What I do think Yuji has the heart to do, however, is knock the guy out. We'll also say that Megumi made the rule with Higuruma in the middle of it, just as it did in the original story. Takaba will also enter the battle suddenly, taking Hazanoki away from Yuji, who'll fight Reggie by himself. Now, this fight is kind of weird. When Reggie says sorcerers are nothing but con artists, he isn't lying. Reggie's curse technique allows him to manifest things from the receipts he has. In the middle of his fight with Megumi, he used a receipt that literally healed him like he went to rest his body for 2 days. How does that... whatever. Reggie himself isn't that much of a good fighter. I mean, he himself says that he doesn't have a powerful technique. But that's the thing. Yuji doesn't either. The only thing is Black Flash, and Yuji doesn't even use a Black Flash until almost 100 chapters later, so I can't just grant him one of those. Just like it was with Megumi, it's a battle of attrition with each person not having a high power technique. I would have went with this boring conclusion had I not remembered that Yuji also has his ways of getting to the opponent quickly. Toto tells us firsthand that he thinks ahead. We see him close distances multiple times in the series, so I don't doubt Yuji could do this given the task at hand. If Yuji ever closes the distance and is able to continuously bait Reggie into hand-to-hand combat, I think Yuji has the means to punch and kick his way to victory. If not, Reggie would just outlast him because again, these two don't have domain expansions or anything crazy. But forget it, that's just a Yuji W more times than not, so put that on the board. Now, I was initially going to make Yuji 550 Finger Sukuna because Megumi technically did fight him, but then he got his body stolen. However, I don't think anyone disagrees that the exact same thing would happen to Yuji if he was in that position. Especially when you consider the fact that Megumi was distraught that his own sister's body was being inhabited by an ancient sorcerer. Yeah, all odds were against Megumi, so with that, we've wrapped up the gauntlet. Yuji's score in the end totaled up to 3.5 wins and 5 losses. Fights that were inconclusive for Megumi, like Toji ending his own life and Hanami interrupting his fight with Kamo, had an ending with Yuji. Toji wouldn't recognize Yuji as his son clearly, and Kamo's battle IQ and drive to actually kill Yuji would lead to it actually happening. Megumi actually won against Kirara, but Yuji doesn't have that same luxury because he just doesn't have the knowledge to dissect her curse technique. I'm eventually going to make a Megumi version of this video soon, so do make sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. Anyways, did y'all enjoy this video? It took me a long time to make, so do make sure to like the video up to show your support. Definitely comment anything you disagree with, but anyways, I'm gonna catch y'all in the next one.